Hello and welcome to EcoResolution, an environmental justice platform that aims to empower and inspire meaningful action in the face of ecological breakdown and climate injustice through education and a big picture approach to change. I could not be more excited to be joined by Sandy Hudson today. Welcome, Sandy. Sandy.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure. So Sandy is the founder of the Black Lives Matter movement presence in Canada and co-director of Black Lives Matter Grassroots. An award-winning activist, writer, and public intellectual, Sandy also helped to found the Black Legal Action Centre, a speciality legal aid clinic, which provides direct legal services and impact litigation for Black communities, and the Wild Seed Centre for Activism and Art, an art centre nurturing Black cultural creation. Currently studying law at UCLA with a specialisation in critical race theory, Sandy also co-hosts the Sandy and Nora Talk Politics podcast, which I really recommend, and is co-author to the best-selling book, Until We Are Free, Reflections on Black Lives Matter in Canada. Sandy, you are so impressive, and there's so many questions that I have to ask you. But first of all, just thank you for being here. So I'd love to kind of ground and center this interview and for everyone who's watching as well, so we can kind of start on the same page in case people haven't visited the BLM website or know too much about it. And if you haven't visited, please do go to the website. You can sign up to the newsletter, donate, explore the resources, look for your local group, or ignite and start your own group, which I hope to speak to Sandy about in a bit. So from the website, Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murder. Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation is a global foundation supporting Black-led movements in the US, UK, and Canada, whose mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. By combating and countering acts of violence, creating space for Black imagination and innovation, and centering Black joy, we are winning immediate improvements in our lives. It's a beautiful paragraph, and Sandy, thank you for being here. I'd love if you could just speak to your perspectives on white supremacy and also the aspect of building local power, how these two can interrelate, and how local power and community resilience can offer not just a solution to the crisis of white supremacy, but also a regenerative kind of path forwards.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. And I just want to start by first saying that I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Tongva people, a place that is unceded territory known as Tovangar, which has been colonized as Los Angeles. And I think it's just really important to start that way as people who are working for Black liberation, as people who are working to refuse white supremacy, to really reflect on and consider where we are in the world. And where I am is a colonized space where Indigenous people and Black people continue to see the degradation of colonization's impact on their lives. And that's just very important. Oh gosh. Big questions.
Big questions.
I mean, white supremacy is so pervasive, across the globe. And right now, in the most overt ways, it used to be, when we had first started, I got involved in BLM in 2014, so it's pretty close to the beginning, that we had to sort of convince people, really work hard to show people where white supremacy was in the world, because it was a little bit more covert. It might have been more obvious to Black communities, but when we were having these conversations with mass culture, sometimes it was very difficult to explain, like take a look at the power structures around the world. White people, white organizations, governments run by majority white states have all of the power. And now we're seeing a situation where we are having this resurgence of really overt, violent, white supremacist movements all over the world. And what a stunning and unpredictable turn of events in some cases. In some cases, I think it was maybe more predictable, but it's terrifying. And as you say, local power is so critically important. And it's important for that local power to be connected on some sort of global scale, on some sort of united project. And so when we're building, I mean, it's the success of our movement has been from people refusing their local realities and scaling that refusal up, inspiring one another, skill sharing, assisting one another in the strategies that work locally, and building those strategies out to a united global movement.
Beautiful, thank you. And you're a co-founder of BLM Grassroots. Has that launched yet, or is it still about to launch? I'd love to hear about the mission behind that.
Yeah, it's had a bit of a soft launch, but it hasn't had like we're planning to do a broader, bigger launch at some point. But yes, that's correct. And what we saw, in this iteration of the movement after the uprisings that have been happening this year in 2020 in response to all sorts of incidents of state violence against Black people all over the world, we really realized that we needed to have some sort of formation that would be focused on resourcing as much as possible local groups, and getting groups who don't necessarily have the same access to mass media, finding some way to have them have access to that mass media so they could talk about their realities in their local context, so that more and more of our stories are becoming known and told and heard. And so it was really the grassroots formation of BLM is where the local organizing lives.
That's incredible. Because one of the amazing things about BLM is that it started as a hashtag and now it's this huge global social movement. And I mean, if we look back in history, it's kind of social movements, civil disobedience, community organizing, direct action, nonviolence, which has been the driving force behind pretty much every really good thing that's happened, I feel, in like human transformation.
100%.
Yeah, like thinking about anything, anything that you learn about in history class, which already is quite a tailored history, but anyway, like all the really like exciting, positive parts are because of a people's movement. And I'd love to.
Yeah, most of the things that we value in society have been fought for.
Yeah.
Have been fought for, and we need to have that orientation and understanding to build the sort of world that we want to see.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's kind of the one of the main reasons why EcoResolution exists, is because I think a lot of us can become very apathetic and passive to what's going on around us because we don't believe that our actions can have any good effect. We become overwhelmed, but also that I feel like we can perceive change making and social movements as trying to make a future that is a bit less bad than where we're headed anyway, in which case you might as well just enjoy your day and rest, or do the things that you like to do. But I think when we can start to envisage and just not even envisage, just recognize social movements as not trying to mitigate some negative parts of life, but trying to kind of co-create resilient communities that are based on care, that have economies which are in line with what communities need, with what the ecosystems need, and that they're movements for justice and liberation and freedom and respect. And that's really exciting. And I feel like BLM's done an incredible job of like having that energy, that harnessing that energy, that collectivity. And I guess, you know, part of the reason is because you can't not be that way, because it's, you know, it just needs to happen now. So, but nevertheless, it's inspiring. It gives me goosebumps to think about it, because on one hand it's devastating, and on the other hand it's like profoundly beautiful and inspiring. And I mean, as someone on the other side of the world, kind of looking to the States as well. But my question is, kind of how do you feel that the tactics of BLM have been so powerful, and how has kind of technology played a part in that? You know, especially kind of looking at like the history of the civil rights movement and how powerful the civil disobedience was then. How have you seen those tactics evolve?
That's a really good question. The very first thing that springs to mind, and the most important thing that is almost always on my mind whenever I'm doing workshops or trying to help develop skills for other activists across our movement, is that the most important thing, one of the most important things that an activist can do is believe that the change that we are seeking is possible. If you do not believe it's possible, if you don't believe that you'll win, then you've already lost, because you won't do everything in your power to make that win come to fruition. So the first and most important thing that we do is to work on ourselves and understand that, you know, just as you were saying before, let's take a look at history. We have shifted culture so many times. People's movements have shifted culture so many times. And to have, you know, as part of my ancestry, just a wonderful history of people refusing the indignities of enslavement, of anti-Blackness, and literally shifting world economies and so on. I mean, I find that super inspiring, and think to myself, well, of course we can win. We've won before. And this sort of thing is nothing lasts forever. Change is constant. And for me, when I take a look at the people who have traditional state power and the people who are fighting on the ground, it just becomes so clear to me that, you know, Black people, we are going to win our liberation. We have to, because we're not going to stop fighting. That's not going to happen. And white supremacy is not going to be able to eliminate us all. So there's only one other option. Either this lasts forever and nothing lasts forever, these fightbacks, or we win. And I feel the same way when I look at really inspiring Indigenous activists refusing the indignities of colonization. I mean, this has been happening for hundreds of years in different manifestations. But what I know is that's not going to stop, and they're not going to be able to eliminate all of these Indigenous communities, these Indigenous nations all over the world. And so, you know, eventually the win will be ours, and it's just how long does it take to get there? What side are the folks who are currently bystanders going to be on at the end of the day? What stories are they going to tell about themselves when they reflect on 2020? Who were they in that time? That's what's really important to impress upon people. But for us as activists, we have to believe that we can win. Because if not, it's just going through the motions of, okay, I guess we're just going to go out the door, make a few placards, and do the same thing that we've been doing for the last few decades and go home, just so that there is some response. Or the conversations are, well, this is what we did last time, it didn't work. Let's get creative. What are we going to do now? Let's learn from the 60s, let's learn from the early 90s, like let's learn from the anti-war movements, let's learn from wherever we can learn from our elders, our ancestors, and what can we build using the new tools of today, you know, as you mentioned, technology, how can we build something even broader? And like, look, during a pandemic, the summer of 2020, the largest social uprising this world has ever recorded. It's probably the largest social uprising this world has ever seen, the Black Liberation Movement. And so that's, you know, that comes from this principled belief that we will win. And it wouldn't be possible if we didn't have that belief underpinning everything.
I love that. Thank you. I'm like nodding my head to everything you were saying, like giving neck cramps. I'm getting excited. But it made me think what you're talking about, you know, about believing that it's possible and it will happen, because I also believe that everything given time is moving towards liberation and flourishing, and because that's what nature does, and the systems which are oppressing that are systems which are inherently unnatural, and that's why they're also breaking down, because they're old structures that will not change, even though everyone's asking them to change, even though that they're causing so much destruction and pain and suffering. So it's just, I agree. It's just the natural way in which things will move forward towards flourishing and freedom. But that said, it has to be the people who are moving it that way. We cannot be passive bystanders. I'm reading at the moment Octavia's Brood. I don't know if you've read that, by Walida Imarisha and Adrienne Maree Brown, and I'm in love with the book. I'm actually in love with both of them.
Yeah.
But just for anyone listening, read it.
I was thinking about that actually when I was talking about, you know, change is the only constant. That is something that is obviously a big theme in Octavia's Brood, and yeah, what a phenomenal series of books. So I'm excited for you reading that. I wish I could experience it anew again, but I've read it several times. Very good.
Yeah, I know, I'm taking it slow so it lasts longer. But just for anyone listening, it's a brilliant book, and they write that whenever we try to envision a world without war, without violence, without prisons, without capitalism, we're engaging in speculative fiction, and all organizing as in all social movement building is science fiction. So organizers and activists dedicate their lives to creating and envisioning another world or many worlds, which also leads me to my next question, Sandy. I'd love to kind of hear about your vision of the world that you want to co-create, or if you want to shift it a little bit, or unless it's completely the same, is kind of the vision behind BLM. Like, what's the movement working towards? Because we need to remember, I think, when we're looking at social movements or our own activism, we're not just dismantling, we're also building something new. So I'd love to hear about that vision.
Yeah, I love this question, because there are so many different paths that we can take, and I think it's really crucial for activists to not get bogged down by the way that the neoliberal right can sometimes ask this question. This kind of like, well, what do you want? Well, what are you going to build? What's your program? Because we have to remember that, you know, when capitalism was forced upon the world, nobody had this particular formation in mind that we all live in 2020. And in fact, capitalism is constantly remaking itself as our governments are changing laws continually, even as we speak, on how they will, you know, structure the economy, respond to different environmental impacts of capitalism, the pandemic, and so on. No cultural social formation is figured out in full at one moment and then implemented in full in another. And so we should refuse that sort of framing of the question. So we may not know absolutely exactly with all of the minutia what the world we're building is going to look like, but we know a few things. Centrally, we are, the Black Lives Matter movement is an abolitionist movement. So we're looking to build a world that ends carceral punishment as one of the central tenets, the central underpinnings of our world. We should not have police interrupting the lives of Black people and often Indigenous people all over the world. That's typically their target, but also the criminalization of poverty, the criminalization of aneurotypical presentations, all of these sorts of ways that the system tries to make the only people who can flourish be this singular representation of humanness. And that is not something that we want. And so quite concretely, we want to see the end to carceral systems, the end of incarceration. We want to see the end of a world where people can live in poverty. That doesn't make sense. This world is abundant and able to give all of us what we need to survive. And we should be able to give that to one another. And because of greed of a very few people at the top of this capitalist system, that has become impossible in this particular formation. And so we're also looking at a world where it's not a capitalist formation. That I fundamentally believe that it's not possible to have a world where everybody can live in dignity that is based on a group of people, a small group of people exploiting a large group of people and exploiting the land that is meant to provide us with the life that we need to live, with all of the things that we need to live a healthy life. And those are just pieces of what this eventual formation will look like. But that, those are the pieces that are really dear to my heart and what I'm looking at when I'm engaged in my speculative fiction moments of activism. I want to live in a world where we don't have our children nervous about whether or not they should even engage in having children themselves because they don't know whether or not the world is going to survive. I want to have a world where everybody has access to the best education and doesn't have to feel as though they need to be from a particular class in order to know things. It seems like so many things in our system are backwards. And I believe that we can do so much better than this. That feels obvious to me.
Yeah, yes, to me too. And I think, because when I say vision, it's like, not like how necessarily like how it's going to happen, but like what kind of paradigm will the world be in? I don't know if that makes sense, but I mean, when you speak about, the end of incarceration, that's like shifting from a system which is like oppressive and punitive, which punishes people who don't follow the rules completely, rather than nurturing people and communities. Like if someone is to do something that would mean that they need to end up in prison, what has led the person to that place in order to do that? I mean, obviously you have some people and who are completely just like unrationally causing pain and suffering, but for the majority, probably 99%, I mean, that's silly for me to put a percentage on it, but the majority of people don't want to cause pain or suffering, but grow up in systems and have ways of being that mean that we live, there's cause and effect, and you have an experience, you have trauma in your body, you end up recreating the same situations where that pain and suffering reoccurs. And I really recommend everyone reading The Body Keeps the Score, which talks about trauma in the body and how we end up reliving our same traumatic experiences. But that's a bit of a tangent, but just to kind of, in response to what you're saying, when you speak about that, I hear like nurturing compassionate communities based on support, respect, kindness, care, again, which seems like an obvious step forwards for us. That's like, it's funny that we can think of having like evolved societies that punish people like they're kind of children, you know, rather than that they're complex beings with their own complex makeup of emotions and reasons for acting the way they do. I'd love to ask you another question about the defund the police, because I know that this has caused so much controversy, and, you know, even people I speak to say, oh, BLM's amazing, but not sure about defund the police. And I think when I first heard it, I thought the same. And then I actually listened to you speak about it, but that was later on. But I just actually decided to find out what it meant. And which is quite a good thing to do if you have an opinion, to actually find out why. Top tip. And yeah, and it was amazing actually, because I think a lot of the controversy behind it again comes from a place of misunderstanding, but also not really understanding that BLM is visionary. It's not like take away the police and society will be fine. It's like deep transformative work needs to occur, and currently, also correct me if I'm wrong, currently the police system is inhibiting the healing and the transformation that needs to occur.
What a beautiful way to put it. Yes, that's totally right. This summer have done so many workshops and interviews about defund the police, and what's consistent is that people often come into the conversation feeling very oppositional, very defensive, thinking, oh, gosh, whatever this woman's about to say, it's gonna be nuts. It's gonna make no sense. And consistently, people come away with, oh my gosh, you convinced me. I never thought about things this way. And it's because we have this idea of the police in our society and what function they serve that comes to us from, you know, television, things that we read, and a deep desire to want the police to be like these heroes in our society, someplace that we can just call if we're experiencing some sort of impact on our safety. And so when people hear defund the police, what they hear often when they have a really a defensive response to that is take away safety and security in society. That's what they hear. That's what garners this response of, oh, how could you? Like, no way. But that's not, the police are not serving a function that is bringing safety and security into our society. That is the thing that we need people to understand. And we require safety and security, and we're not getting that. And so there are so many different ways to talk about how this manifests. For example, one of the big pieces is folks who are experiencing a mental health crisis or some sort of mental health distress. Often the only service that's available for those people to call is the police, some sort of emergency number to call to get some sort of support. The police will show up. Around the world, the police have shown themselves to be terrible at providing any sort of service for people who are experiencing that. And to us, it's like, why would we have the police continue to provide this service when oftentimes when they engage with people who are having some sort of mental health crisis, those people end up being killed or seriously harmed? Why would we not have an emergency service that people can call that is specific to mental health crises? Why can't we build that? Because so much money is going into the police. So much tax dollars are going into the police. Around, where I'm from in Canada, and in America, it's between around 25% to, in some cases, over 60% of city budgets that are going to the police. And then, transit prices are going up, for example. User fees on transit are ballooning. And then we have people who can't afford to take transit. And then, so what do? They try to get into transit some other way. I remember doing that myself as a kid who didn't have a lot of money. And then what does the system do? It gives more power to the police to go find those people, go check, make sure that those people paid. And we have a carceral response to people living in poverty as a result of not properly funding the services that we should be able to give for free. If we weren't giving so much money to the police, we could have a free transit system. And then we wouldn't need police to monitor the transit system and to have some sort of carceral response to people not being able to pay to use the transit system. Another way that we can think about this is decriminalization. So we decriminalize poverty. We can decriminalize other things like drugs. So many people who are incarcerated are non-violent people who have some sort of drug use charge. And it's like, why? Why would we need to lock those people up? I mean, worldwide, we're having these conversations about the opioid crisis and about different ways that we can respond to people, the overdose crisis that we're seeing through the use of opioids. During the crack epidemic in the 80s and early 90s of North America, the response was to criminalize everybody. Go after them, go find where people are engaged in this drug use, and the police will arrest and incarcerate them. Why? Why would that be the response? Now that we see the opioid crisis, where many of the folks who are experiencing this crisis come from white communities, the response is different. That's one of the ways that white supremacy works. People are thinking, okay, well, maybe we can have a different response to this. Maybe we can be more compassionate. Maybe we can have a public health approach to this crisis. Well, why don't we have a public health approach to all drugs? Why not? It's cheaper. We don't have to incarcerate people. It doesn't lead to these raids, these violent raids, the way that police monitor and surveil particular types of communities. Just do away with all of that and give people the support and care that they need, and understand that a lot of, for example, the opioid crisis is encouraged by people getting hurt on the job and needing something, in their workplaces. They're working really difficult jobs, that are hard on their bodies, and needing some sort of therapy for that. And with the lack of options available, painkillers, and then when those painkillers are not available, moving to options that may not be from a pharmacy. Okay, if that's the reality, what are the police going to do to solve that? That doesn't solve the problem. Let's do the difficult work of actually solving the problem at its root. How can we change how people are living so that if drug use becomes a problem, we can provide them with the care that they need? And if they are looking for some other solutions to some sort of problem, how can we change the system so that that's possible? And so many of these solutions would be more possible if we had access to all of the billions and billions of dollars that go into policing in Canada and America alone.
Isn't it something like $20 million a day or something crazy?
It's far, far more than that. It's far
really?
In Canada alone, just at the federal level, so the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and so that's not taking into account any of the municipal police forces or any of the provincial police forces, it's $11 million a day. And that's a country of just over 30 million people. You know what I mean?
That's
And
unbelievable.
America is much bigger. So you have to think it's actually billions of dollars that's going into policing, and most of that work is not for violent crimes, and often is not for criminal activity at all. People are being incarcerated in the United States because, you know, they're failing to pay a fine, and then failing to show up to a hearing about that fine, maybe because they have to go to work. And then that allows a judge to issue an arrest warrant. Like, so many people are in jail for no reason, for no reason. And a lot of that begins with policing. So let's defund the police so we can fund some solutions in our society.
It's like ridiculous to kind of conceptualize the amount of money that goes into some aspects of society in comparison to the amount of money that doesn't go into other parts. And if you look at it as like, what does society value? What does society want to nurture? If you're not investing in public health, in communities, in education, in environmental protection, in ecosystem restoration, I mean, you know, obviously I could continue, but I'll stop there.
There's so much.
There's so much. And then, but then, you know, the disproportionate amount of money that goes into punishing people, and to say that that's what makes society safe. It's like, well, what is safe? Like, what does it mean to actually feel safe in this life? And I just do not believe that it's that kind of top down, like oppressive system. I think, and I love how Black Lives Matter talks about investing in communities and the local, because that, I think, is a huge reason behind so much of the suffering, you know, whether it's like from mental health, all the way to just kind of the way that communities are functioning, and kind of putting power back in the communities for people to look after each other again, rather than relying on these big systems where we're so far away from the people who are meant to be helping us, that like, how can you actually ever feel supported if you don't have a relationship with the support? Because it also then becomes unmutual, where you have the victim and then you have the savior, which is not a healthy healing process anyway. So if you are healing within community, you can both be the person looking for support and also supporting, which is like instrumental to recovery in so many ways anyway. I've got a question, actually a practical one that I don't know the answer to. So when you say defund the police, but does that mean completely, absolutely no police? Because what would happen then with like really violent people who just wanted to be really, really violent?
Yeah, that's another question that we get a lot, and I am so happy to answer it, because there's and this is not, I'm not saying that this is the impetus behind your question, but a lot of people will ask that question thinking, am I speaking to a reasonable person right now, or am I speaking to someone who's like absolutely nuts? And that's often the hidden subtext behind the question. Did you mean completely defund, or are you talking about just a little bit of moving money here and there? And I think that I think it's an obvious way to try to think about the question, but I think there's a better way to frame the question. The better way to frame the question is, what do the police do well? Because that's where we should start. You know, like if we had you know, a public health system where everyone was getting really shoddy care, you know, we wouldn't be like, well, should we get rid of all doctors, or should we, like, you know what I mean, or should we get rid of all? That's not the way that we should think about this. Is, okay, what safety issues are working in our society and what's not? And if we do a careful consideration of what the police do well, actually, it's hard to find anything that they do well. And so, I mean, just critically, even things that we would think are like, okay, well, sure, maybe they don't do mental health stuff well. Maybe they don't do, maybe we should decriminalize drugs. But surely someone who, this is actually came up in an interview, which might feel wild to the two of us, we're both women. Surely people need someone to call if there is a rape or sexual assault. Yeah, I think that that's true. People do need some place to call. And oftentimes the police just aren't it. Like currently the police in America are less than 20% of cases are even of like sexual assault are even reported to the police, and much fewer of those result in some sort of resolution. In Canada, it's less than 10%. The police aren't taking care of that issue anyway. So, and why has it been okay for us to not exist with an emergency service that can provide services to people who experience gender-based violence and sexualized violence? Well, it's okay because of how people devalue women and non-gender conforming people, gender non-conforming people, and trans people, and people who are at risk for sexualized violence. With respect to something like burglary or theft, again, the police are resolving less than 15% of these cases. And by resolving, I mean laying a charge. And so that's not even a resolution, that's laying a charge, which may result in whoever is charged being proven innocent. So less than 15% of cases, your insurance company is far more useful to you than the police. So why would the police be the ones doing this? And like, let's think about violent crime. The police don't prevent violent crime. They don't. Most of the time, when a violent crime happens, the police are responding to it after the fact. They don't prevent it. What's important for us is to understand where violent crime comes from and to deal with those situations before they arise. And if we don't have that orientation, violent crime continues. I mean, this is a piece that's really difficult for people to think through, but just like, let's be honest with ourselves. We have police in our society right now. Violent crime is rampant right now. It's because the police do not prevent violent crime from happening. What we want as a society is someone to respond and either stop the threat as it's occurring, stop whatever's happening as it's occurring, or to be able to stop it beforehand. We've got nothing doing that last thing that I said, and we should have something doing that. In terms of intervening in an ongoing violent crime, again, this is very, very rare, and less than 5% of what the police do, it's less than 5%. So what I think is really critical is, are the police the ones to deliver that service? What we see in our community is that sometimes people will call for a violent crime, and because of the assumptions that the police lay on bodies that look like ours, it might be me calling for help and then me who gets arrested, because they can't see that it's not me who's the person who's violent, it's not me who's the criminal. In Canada, we had this terrible case in Quebec City where a white man entered a mosque and killed and just indiscriminately shot several people. It was a massacre, and the people who were using the mosque were people of color and Black people, and called the police. And when the police arrived, they're saying like the person who did this was this white young person, looks like this, and the news initially was like, it was a person of color. The police were interrogating people who had just been through this horrifying experience. So are the police the right people to engage with this type of intervention? Mm-hmm. Given their culture, their history, what they've been tied to forever in terms of really targeting people who look like me? I don't think so. Do I think that we should have some sort of body that can intervene while something's happening? Yes. Do I think that the police are the ones to do that? I don't. I think that there's too much corruption and too much error that happens when they're engaged to solve something like that. And the data speaks for itself.
Yeah.
They don't often do this work, and when they do, they don't do it well.
Yeah, wow, it's so like myth busting as you speak. And so you're so articulate. But what really also struck me as you were speaking is just generally like the need for deeper responses to the crises of our time, and that, you know, kind of punitive measures or figuring things out after the fact isn't really good enough. Like, imagine if that money was being invested into into preventing these occurrences from happening. And you can see that with medicine as well. Like the Western medicine is all you get sick and then you take something to help you get better, whereas a lot of other medicines and more traditional medicines in the West as well would have been preventative. And you get it as well, like the environmental movement going mad, trying to get our governments to limit carbon emissions and to stop just stop these systems which are just kind of fast forwarding us into like oblivion. And it's like they don't understand how to be preventative. It's like, go with the plan, we'll deal with it later, go with the plan. And it's like, it's so weird, but it is like, it's something mental. It's like a sickness, like a psychosis to not be able to understand the implications of actions and not want to do something before that to stop it. Like to me, that's actually what mental illness is. It's not being able to take the action that needs to occur before something bad. I don't know. It's anyway, deeper responses to the crisis of our time, I think, is what's being called for from many parts of the world and in many movements. And I'd love to hear a bit about your perspective on the environmental movement in general. What I felt and kind of where I'm coming at it from is that there's been a slight failure on the environmental movement for putting so much onus on polar bears instead of people, as though like people aren't going to make the emotional link with polar bears, but they do with people, generally speaking, you hope. And so for me, I'm really passionate about exploring the connections, you know, between the social, political, personal, spiritual, environmental crises that we face, and like drawing those out. So, because not only do I think they're interesting, I also believe that if we start acting on solutions in one, ideally all at the same time areas, we're also going to be benefiting all those areas as well, because the issues are interconnected. Not the same, but interconnected, and so are the solutions forward. So I'd love to hear you speak a little about that. I know you're very passionate about Indigenous rights, and I've heard you speak about that before.
Yeah, I think I think the most popular manifestations of eco-justice movements, environmental justice movements, are popular because mass culture finds them really easy to accept. And one of the reasons they find them easy to accept is because it's not pointing a finger at, look at the ways that you are working society in ways that manifest in degradations of entire communities. I think that there are broader environmental movements that include Indigenous people that are being led by Indigenous people, that are being led by people who are the most affected, but they don't necessarily get the same sort of, they're not as attractive to a mass media environment that is, quite frankly, quite capitalist. I think that there is a there's a tendency among certain types of people who want to be able to solve our environmental problems and keep the system the way it is. And to those people, it's really hard to accept that we also, as part of this environmental, this environmental crisis that we're facing, it's really hard for them to accept that they also have to take a look at the ways that we are exploiting particular communities and harming particular communities, because that is what makes the world work. It's like, well, there's this massive tar sands project in Canada, one of the largest environmental terrifying projects that is harming the world on the planet. And it is most urgently harming the indigenous communities through where those projects are. And people would rather say, like, okay, well, we still need to make the money that these projects will make us. And we can just do some carbon pricing. We can just add some carbon pricing, shift some money around, shift that money down the chain to the consumer at the end of the day, and that'll solve the problem. But if we were forced to look at all of the people who are dying right now, not tomorrow, not in 10 years, all the people who are dying and getting sick right now as a result of those projects, and ask ourselves, is this worth exploitation? That's a much harder question. And because it's people who are devalued in our society, in our global society at large, people are not willing to look at that. I mean, look at these hurricanes, look at Katrina, look at the rising sea levels and the potential disappearance of whole countries in the Caribbean and island nations. It's terrifying. How can we not look at the way that this is impacting people, and that not be the central piece of what we're talking about? This isn't about saving cute animals. Like, I mean, that's part of it, like these are living creatures, absolutely. But we must also be talking about the human cost, and the human cost has already begun. It's ongoing for quite some time. And it's because of white supremacy. It's because of white supremacy. And it should be obvious to us. After hearing me say something like this, it should be obvious to you, folks who are listening, that it's because of white supremacy that we're not having those conversations at the scale that we need to be having those conversations. Yeah. This crisis is already, it's not a crisis of tomorrow. Like, I feel like, as the American elections are happening right now, it feels like everyone's talking about this crisis of tomorrow. This is not a crisis of tomorrow. This is a crisis of today. And we should be discussing the human cost as central to everything that we're discussing. And the failure of certain parts of the environmental movement to do that is, I think, a failure for all of us in what's possible for change. And so we really have to shift that, and to come with an anti-racist lens, to come with a lens that understands how white supremacy impacts us all, and to come with a decolonization lens when we are engaging the environment. This isn't something that's like alienated. This isn't something that we're apart from, where it's like trees over there, humans over here, polar bears over there, humans over here, sea levels over there, humans over here. That's not what's happening. There are humans who are being impacted by this, who don't necessarily have the same access to mass media that some of the largest environmental movements do. And so that has to shift. That absolutely has to shift.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sandy. I mean, you hear it all the time. We have 10 years, we have 11 years, we have 9 years to act. And it's like, we actually, I mean, according to the IPCC, but actually we have to act now, because people are dying. We have this is a statistic from, I think, 2018 18, but something like 23 climate refugees every single year. That's only going to be growing. We've seen the forest fires, we've seen the livelihoods. It's like, this is not for tomorrow, and it is completely 100% necessary for us to be learning about what is climate justice, what does that mean? And I know you've got to go, but just one more thing is that when you said about, you know, folks who want to address climate change but don't want to see systemic change, and this is something that we get very frustrated about, you know, when people start just talking about carbon because carbon's something that you can trade and it's financial. It's like, carbon's important, of course, but that is not the depth of response that's needed. And Tamsin Omond, an amazing activist I know, said that anything that does not look like complete societal transformation is not capable of creating the changes that we need. And that's on the environmental level and on the social level. And I really, when I say that, like, I think I used to get scared by the idea of systems change. And it was only actually until like a year and a half ago that I embraced the term. And now it's like, no, systems change is amazing, because look at the pain and suffering being caused by these systems. They just don't work. Like, they weren't made to work, and for everyone, and they definitely don't work. And like, how can we find joy and excitement and liberation and collaboration in seeking to transform those systems, or co-create new systems, better systems, regenerative ones that contribute to the thriving of ecosystems, but also of our communities as well. And yeah, so Sandy, is there anything you'd like to kind of finish with before we wrap up?
Yeah, just to your listeners, you know, there is no world in which we solve the climate crisis, in which we solve the environmental crisis, and we don't shift our societal reliance on extraction, exploitation, and discarding. There's no world where it works. We cannot keep looking at the globe as a thing to extract from. We cannot keep looking at poor communities as things, as people to extract from and not care for, because those are the environments, their environments that are going to be harmed first and the worst. We cannot keep exploiting people and just looking at this world as a thing to be squeezed for resources, and people as the things to be squeezed for resources, so that Jeff Bezos and billionaires of the world can live the most comfortable lives. That there's no world in which that works. And so we have to be committed to full systems change for the environment, for Black liberation, for decolonization, for all of these really big things that we need to change. And it's like, it's totally possible. Like when we're sitting here and talking about it, it just feels obvious. Why would we treat carbon like a currency? That's ridiculous.
It's a joke.
How is that going to solve anything? It's laughable.
It's laughable. It's predictable and laughable.
It's predictable and laughable. And so, can we come up with something better? We can fly to the moon. I think we can come up with something better. And so we just need to be committed to the fact that it's going to take a real big shift, but it's possible. It's possible. The current ideas are so ridiculous that it has to be possible to come up with something a little better.
Oh, Sandy, you've been absolutely amazing. I'm going to ask you to send me some links so that when I upload the interview onto YouTube and onto our website, that listeners can find out how to kind of support you, find out more about your work, find your podcast, and all of that. So Sandy, thank you so much.